Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So again, we're moving along with Parshat Noach and the Parsha of Noach, and we're on, as you can see, the we're on verse 10. So let's take a look again at verse 10. So we're talking now about the generations that were following Noah, and there were here we go, here are the various genealogies, and we were talking about Nimrod. Here, let's take a look. Who hechel liot gibor ba'aretz. I just want to remind you, he began to be one of the mighty in the land. And so he represents perhaps a, a, a great, an ungreat moment, right, of human beings giving themselves all the power and attributing themselves all the power and rejecting God. That is his gvura here, is that he did not he did not want to submit to God's authority, and that's he is the sort of epitome of such behavior. So let's keep going. So Vatahi Reshit Mamlachto Bavel, right? The beginning of his reign or his sovereignty was Babylonia, Bavel, the Erech, and these other place names, Erech, Akkad, V'Chalneh, Be'eretz Shinar, in the land of Shin'ar. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at this Be'eretz Shin'ar here. Tanya, so it was taught. Lama Nikra Shma Shin'ar. Why was this territory called Shin'ar? What was the significance of that name? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is an Amora. He is considered to be the author or the editor of the Talmud Yerushalmi, very major player even in the Bavli. So he lived in the land of Israel. He himself did not live in Babylonia, even though he's mentioned numerous times in the Babylonian Talmud. So what did he say? Shikol metei mamul, that all those who perished in the flood, nin arusham, they rolled there. They basically came out or were brought there. It's not quite the word. Lina air means sort of like to shake, right? To shake something out, right? That's where they were. For Rabbi Abahu Amar, but Rabbi Abahu said, Shemina eret ashireha, that because that land empties out those who are wealthy. So here we go. So Nin Arusham. Mipnei Shehi Amukama Od, right? So because it is a very low altitude, Asher Al-Kain Nikrat Bavel, and for this reason, that area is also known as Bavel, Babylonia. Shehi Gam Shinar, that is because Shinar and Babylonia are one and the same. Uh, let's see, Beshem Metzula, right? Nikra Bavel, Beshem Metzula. It's called like a trench, right? Ukashimo Katuv B'Yeshayahu Mendab, as is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 44, HaOmer Litzula Harbi, who calls Litzula, and that's this place, it's actually a reference to Babylonia, my shaft, right? Who calls my shaft my sword. And this is a reference to the campaign, I think, of Nebuchadnezzar, because, of course, the Babylonians mounted this massive campaign and created an empire, at least for that time. Yuyan Sham B'Mefarshim, he says, examine also the interpreters as to this particular verse in Isaiah. Okay, so now we're talking about Rabbi Abahu's point where it says he empties out. It's called Shin'ar because it empties out all its wealthy. Ulai hapirush. possibly to understand this, the explanation is she'ein kiyum lo shram, that their wealth has no permanence, right? It doesn't last for very long. Or possibly, she'ein ha'ashirut metakenet nafsham, or it could have a deeper meaning, and that is that their wealth doesn't improve themselves. They don't get better because of their wealth. They don't use it to improve. U'kemosha katuv bebeitza lamed bet, as is referenced in the tractate Beitza, page 32b. Atirei Bavel, the wealthy of Babylonia, Yordim Gehinom, they go down to Gehinom, Mipnei why? She'en merachamin al habriot, because they have no pity on other creatures. Here they are, extremely wealthy. They are in a position to be of great assistance to their fellow human beings, and they don't. And as a result, they go down to Gehinom. And of course, here we're talking about a characteristic that is not limited to that particular time period. And it's a really very strong comment on the amassing of wealth and how you choose to use it. There's no sin in being wealthy if you, of course, acquired it in honest ways because you were a shrewd businessman or smart that way, or however you got it. The issue is once you have got it, once you've acquired it, how do you choose to use it? Just for yourself and to increase your wealth? Or do you use it to put yourself in a position to be philanthropic? Shin'ar u Bavel, and of course, Shin'ar is identified with Babylonia. Kemevu'ar beparsha hasmucha, as will be clarified in the next parsha. That's parsha Yud Aleph, parsha 11. So chapter, parsha is also a chapter. So you see here we're in chapter 10. I wanted you to see that. And so, of course, the next chapter is going to be chapter 11. And he says verses 2 through 9. V'hinei afal pi she'en hechrech lidrosh, right? And even though it's not compelling interpretation, ma shenikret, mitchila shem irzu b'shem Shin'ar, while there's no necessity, and I know it's something to compel you to interpret the fact that it was originally called by the name of the city was originally called Shin'ar, ach kach der Chazal, but it's a style of our rabbis of blessed memory, lidrosh shemot, to put interpretations to names. In other words, he's saying that we didn't have to explain why Bavel and Shinar, why this word, what Shinar was its significance. But the rabbis like to do it. They like to look at names and get deeper meanings out of them. Ukemosh katuv berachot, and as is mentioned in the tractate Brachot, page 7b, al hapasuk asher sam shamot ba'aretz. There's a verse that talks about the devastation that was put in the land. This is in Psalm 46. Al tikra shamot, or shamut, do not read this as devastation, ella shemot, but read it rather as names. In other words, that God has placed names in the world. Ye'uyan sham, check it out there. And look further at the drasha that's coming up regarding this particular subject. So again, we could stand back a second and say, well, wait a second. So what significance is there in God giving names to various places? And I think the point is that those names have something to do with the very essence of their existence there, that those names have deeper significance than simply arbitrary names given, but that there is a divine level of significance to those particular names in the fact that they're given by the divine from a divine level. Let's take a look at the next little section here, okay? So, right. Be'eretz Shi'ar, in the land of Shi'ar. Tanya, again, Tanya, it's taught. Lama Nikra Shma Shin'ar, same question. Why was its name Shin'ar, given the name Shin'ar? Shehem Metim Betashnuk, or Tasnuk, I think it's Tashnuk. In other words, why? Because they die by suffocation. Below ner, without a lamp, uvelo merchatz, and without a bathhouse. So that's, let's see, of course, it's sort of curious as to what's going on there. Let's take a look at the footnote here. Allah pasuk, let's see, I think this is Parshat Bo, on the, this is on the verse in Parshat Bo, that's one of the early Parshiot in Exodus. Et asher hitalalti b'Mitzrayim, in that I made sport in Egypt. Tirgem Yonatan. So one of the Aramaic translators, Yonatan, explains, he translates it as Yatma Dishaniket Min Mitzrae. So that I strangled the Egyptians. So hit alalti, he's translating as to strangle. It does actually have the more common meaning would be to make sport of, but he understands it as strangled. Ulefize yesh lomar, and according to this, the fact that Yonatan translates it this way, one could say, hakavana, that the intention is shemetim be, let's see, ke mezulzalim, that they die in a dissolute kind of way. V'holalim, so it's mezulzalim v'holalim. They die in a dissolute and it looks like confused sort of way. She'ein umdim lifnei mitatam bener, because they do not, I think here, they don't stand. In other words, I think here we're talking about people before their coffin. Mita is a bed, but it's also understood to mean one's last resting place. Bener, with a lamp. Ve'en rochatzin umetarim gufan, and they do not wash and purify their body. And you know that, of course, we have that concept of tahara, of washing and preparing the body for burial. So that this is a reference to that idea. Shekol ele, because all these hem derech kavod let's see, okay, kavod, because all these particular practices of lighting a lamp in the presence of the body and washing and preparing the body, and that's the merchatz, right, the bathhouse. Derech kavod, it is by way of respect, umeni atam, and in their absence, if you don't do these things, derech bizayon, so that is treating the body in a disrespectful kind of way. V'tam habavar, and the reason for this matter, shenahagu chen, that they behaved in this way. Yesh lomar, one could say, al pi ma shekatuv b'Shabbat kaf bet, what is written in Tractate Shabbat, page 25b, ala pasuk, regarding the verse, v'tiznach mishalom nafshi. So here we could say, and my soul, well, here it looks like loathed. I think what it's trying to say is that I was unable, nafshi here meaning simply myself, right? It's not that I loathed peace, but that I was so far away from it. We're talking about Eicha in the book of Lamentations. In other words, he's describing a state of such unhappiness, such sense of discomfort at the destruction of Jerusalem, right? So in a way, he's saying this, the author of the book of Lamentations, of course, according to tradition, that's Jeremiah. Zo hadlakat ner b'Shabbat. So he says that it's referring that this statement that I was so far removed, right, from a sense of peace, this refers to the lighting of a candle on Shabbat, before Shabbat, right, candle lighting on Shabbat. So I want to mention that the beautiful mitzvah, because we say, Asher Kitchanu b'mitzvotav, who sanctified us through his commandments and commanded us to light the Ner of Shabbat, right, the candles of Shabbat. You realize that it's not found as a mitzvah anywhere in the Torah. It's not there. And I believe that this is a significant statement on the part of our rabbis, of our ancient rabbis, because I believe that there were those, whether we're talking about Sadukim or Karaites, but in other words, one of the groups of people who rejected rabbinic tradition, to understand the statement in the Torah, which says, "You shall not burn a fire on Shabbat," to sit in their homes in the darkness, so they wouldn't have any fire, any kind of fire burning in their homes on Shabbat. And the rabbis said, how can you have a shalom on Shabbat when you're sitting in the dark, when you're having your meal in the dark, when you're bumping into people because you can't see them? And so they understood the passage of, you shall not burn a fire on Shabbat, and they took it very seriously as meaning to actually kindle a flame on Shabbat, and not to understand it as meaning and not to have a fire burning on Shabbat. And so the rabbis also, Maimonides explains it, have the authority to declare mitzvot if in fact there's no denial of it, if they're not doing anything to contravene the mitzvot of the Torah. And so they commanded the Jewish people to light the candles, the Shabbos lamp, before Shabbat and allow it to burn without any interference. There are laws, all kinds of laws of what you are and what you're not allowed to do regarding the Shabbat lamp. So, for example, if the lamp has a reservoir, you cannot add oil to the reservoir on Shabbat, right? So they were very careful about it. But the idea of being able to sit down to your meal or whatever activities you were going to have in the home with light burning in the Shabbat. And of course, we know that before incandescent lamps they used a flame, all right, was in fact a mitzvah. So that's the idea. And that's why he talks mishalom nafshi, right? My soul, couldn't stand, couldn't couldn't live with a sense of peace, was unable to. Okay, so here, Nishiti Tova. So right, that it goes on to say in this verse, right? But is nach mishalom nafshi, and then it looks like Nishiti Tova. I discarded goodness, zo beit hamerchatz. So this goodness, that has to do with the bathhouse, because we know that when you go and you bathe yourself, it can help you feel your body refreshed and a sense of inner warmth and goodness, etc. The Katfu HaMefarshim, and those interpreters wrote, de tafas rak shnei dvarim elu, that of course there are other things, right, that make life very pleasant and give us a sense of shalom. So why did they pick only these two particular things? Why these things in particular? Mishum de shemen ve'etzim, and the reason is because oil and wood, hayu yikareh hamitziut, because in fact in Babylonia, right, finding wood and oil was very expensive. It was very hard to find bevavel in Babylonia. The Shin'ar hi Bavel, and of course we know that the land of Shi'ar is also identified with the land of Babylonia, Kemevu'ar beParsha Hasmucha, as was explained in the previous sentence, right? Yud Aleph Bet, this is chapter 11, verse 2, I think we're talking about here, etc. Vetet, and verse 9. Ulachain, and for this reason, lo shimshu b'hem gam letzorchei metim, and that's why they didn't use the wood to heat up the water or the oil to kindle a lamp for the needs of the dead. They didn't. Umasha ara'u chazal bichlal, and what our sages saw in general, lidrosh hamilah Shin'ar, to interpret this word Shin'ar, the inyan zeh, in this particular way. Yesh lomar, one could say, mishum de bashalom romi, because in Latin, right, in the language of Rome, heve biur milot, and this looks like this is the Latin that he's saying here, and I'm not familiar with this Latin expression, right? That the explanation of these words, sane, could be health, right? Or sans, right? Or something like that. And it means, so sans, we know in French means, or san, bli means without. And this is, it's not a Latin word that I recognize, but it means without light, right? Or another word, usane. So again, this is the word sense, arir or arur, something like that. Bli merchatz. So there's some Latin word which I do not recognize, but it refers to a bathhouse, and bli, a bathhouse. So they're saying that in some ways that this word Shin'ar is a play on words, and that there's a Latin equivalent that sounds very similar that has these particular meanings. V'yadua, and we know ki Chazal hishtamshu harbe belashon rami. That we know that our sages, our ancient sages, were used and referred quite a lot to Latin. They were very familiar with it. Ul asher ki havarat hamilum, and the fact that the pronunciation of these words, krova lemilat shinar, in other words, those Latin words are so similar, they sound so similar to the word Shinar, lachen darshuha me'inyanim ela, and that's why they felt comfortable to explain it in this particular way. So for example, I'll give you another example that I remember, and that is when Joseph, right, in the Joseph story, is promoted to being second, right, to Pharaoh. And they say people called before him Avrech. And so we know that Av in Hebrew means father, but the word Rech in Latin is what we call Rex, probably was pronounced Reich, and we know in German, for example, we have the word Reich, right? So meaning father of the king, right? Meaning, of course, the king's chief counselor. That's the expression that you use to say that. So here they are taking that av rech and saying that that rech sounds like reich or rex or however you want to say in Latin. And so that's what it means, father of the king. So chief counselor. So let's see. Right. V'chein, and in a similar way, matzinu harbe lechazal, we've had a lot of cases, right, in sages of blessed memory, shedashu al yesod zeh, that they interpreted Torah on this kind of basis. Sheken belashon ploni, that is to say, that in a certain other language other than Hebrew, right, korin ledavar ploni kach v'chach, they call a certain thing that particular term. Ukenoda, and so we know, ve'ein laharich, and there's no need to go into further discussion about this. And I am going to move our little arrow over here. Let's see if I can do it. Over here. And so let's see, we have, okay, we can go over here. Excuse me. And we did not finish completely this particular passage, but that's where we'll start next time in our discussion of this. So I'm going to stop the share. So for the record, any thoughts, any comments, any questions? Yes? Harlan, did you want to say something, add something?
No, there's no question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll stop the recording.